At this time, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today. We have none other than Dr. Stacy McCormick. Dr. McCormick is the wife of Dr. Demetrius McCormick and also the mother of Zoe and Jackson McCormick. She is a professor of English at TCU. She teaches African American literature and African diaspora literature. She's also a faculty core member in Women and Gender Studies Department and the Comparative Race and Ethnic Studies Department. Dr. McCormick is in the process of writing a book, or has written a book that will be published in the fall. The book is entitled Staging Black Fugitivity. It focuses on contemporary Black drama and legacy of slavery. I present to you at this time as one of our board members, Mr. Jimmy Walker, actually our Vice President, escort Dr. McCormick to the stage. Would you give a round of applause to Dr. McCormick?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How old are you? Well, they say black don't crack. Well, thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. It is a true honor to be here. When I got the request from Brenda Sanders Wise, who has been a wonderful organizer, I had no idea what a treat I would be in for coming here. And the panel that just left, I kind of want to just let them drop the mic because I don't know what else I can say. But just know that I just feel honored to be in your presence, and I hope that my words today in some way will give you some edification. And I also am very glad to know about the work of the Tarrant County Black Historical Genealogical Society. And so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The title of my talk today, in thinking about the theme for today's events, is Visionary Women. And I wanted to focus in on a group of people that we all know quite well, but we don't get to talk about as much, and that's Black mothers. And thinking about Black mothers and their role that they've played in the fight for justice across time in the United States. And so in keeping with that, I wanted to dedicate some of my remarks to my own mothers. And so if my clicker will work, there we go. There's my mother, Jamie Selman, who has been a tremendous influence for me. My grandmother, Lily Pearl Selman, who is recently passed on. She passed away in February of 2018, and I still miss her to this day. And so everything I do in honor of her and all the work and effort she put into raising me. Because as we know, when you are a Black child in a Black family, you get raised by everybody. And my beautiful grandmother, L.G. Riley, who is still living today at the age of 93. And so, yes. And I open with them just in the keeping with the idea Maya Angelou planted within our brains, that when you walk into a room, you don't walk in that room alone. You walk in that room with the people who came to make you. And it's particularly your mothers and your grandmothers and your ancestors. So in thinking about that, I just felt that I would be remiss not to begin with them, my visionary women. And so in thinking of the theme for today and my remarks, there are many directions I could go toward in terms of champions of peace and nonviolence. We are in an era where women are actively advocating for their needs, they're speaking truth to power, and for women of color, this is even more felt because they not only sit at the intersection of gender oppression, but also racial oppression. And so I wanted to just kind of ground my words today in Kimberly Crenshaw's notion of intersectionality, And so there's Kimberly Crenshaw, who basically, if the image also helps us to see that often people sit at that midsection between all of these social forces that come upon us when we're trying to navigate the world. And if you are a woman, if you are a black person, if you embody those things all at the same time, then she called that intersectionality. So many of us have already known and experienced that. She gave us language for it. And so just kind of thinking about the definition that intersectionality is the acknowledgement that within groups of people and with a common identity, whether it be gender, sexuality, race, or one of the many other defining aspects of identity, there exists intragroup differences or these internal differences that deepen our experiences. And so in other words, each individual experiences social structure slightly differently because of their intersections of their identities. And it reflects an intersection of overlapping oppressions. And so because of this, we don't often recognize that people embody those positions. We often, they don't fit within the framework that we have for, so when we talk about racial social justice, we often go to one particular image, usually it's black men. Or when we talk about women's rights, we usually go to one image, and that's usually white women. And so black women are often left out of that equation. And because of that, we don't get to attend to the very specific needs that black women have. And this is true also for mothers. And so for this reason, black women have had to make themselves visible in meaningful ways, enforcing society to see us, to see our pain. We become more legible to people who dismiss black women as meaningful citizens and subjects. And as we saw today from Brenda Sanders-Wise in our panel, black women have done so much across time in our history, but often they're alienated from the very movements that they support. And so black women continue to ask the question, ain't I a woman, right? And this is ironic because they've been the biggest proponents. They put their bodies on the line so often for these movements. And so in thinking about this idea, though, of nonviolence and peace, I think about black women as saying, well, if there's no justice, there is no peace. And so I want to think about black women as productive agitators, as disturbers of the peace, or disruptors of the narrative or the status quo, right? Brittany Cooper, who is a black feminist writer, she calls this eloquent rage. And when I was thinking about my remarks today, I said, you know, black women are very peaceful, but if you cross them, they'll pull out some of that eloquent rage. Dress you down, and then you sitting there and you don't know what happened to you. I've been on the receiving end of that. Now that I'm getting older, I can give a little bit. But Brittany Cooper is inspired by Audre Lorde, who talks about the uses of anger and this idea that with focus, with precision, anger and rage can become a powerful source of energy, serving progress and change. And so Cooper desires that her rage be focused and precise. And she uses black women historically to try to channel her own anger about the social injustices she faces, and she's inspired by that. And so when they claim anger as this legitimate emotion, I'm thinking that yes, that's very true. And when black women draw upon that anger, it's not violent. It's actually a call to action, a rallying cry, a scream in the wilderness in the hopes of a clearer path and a brighter day. And it's also future-minded. And so I'm thinking particularly about black mothers using their anger and speaking to some of the most pressing issues of our time. And so to do that, I just want to give a little bit of historical context. So in my studies, literature, we have a figure that we talk about, which is the outraged mother. And it's based on a black woman figure out of slavery who is attempting to claim her agency even as the society wants to devalue her. Joanne Braxton, who gives us this definition that I cite. She's speaking about Frederick Douglass's mother. And Frederick Douglass, in his narrative, talks about his mother traveling for miles in the dark to bring him food and to remind him that he's somebody's child. So even as slavery was trying to separate them, his mother denied that and still fought to let him know that he had a place in the world and that he wasn't just a slave. And so outraged mothers not only had to claim their motherhood, because as you know, families were ripped apart in slavery, motherhood was often denied, they also had to preserve their own sense of self, because Black womanhood was constantly threatened. And Black women's bodies were always often made to be tools of the structures around them. And so Joanne Braxton defines it. She says the outraged mother travels alone through the darkness to impart a sense of identity and belongingness to her child. She sacrifices and improvises. Are we improvisers? We know how to make a way out of no way. To create the vehicles necessary for the survival of the flesh and spirit. Implied in all her actions and fueling her heroic ones is the abuse of people, and her person. So she's fighting not just for her people, but herself. And so we also see this outraged mother emerge in narratives like Harriet Jacobs' incidents in the life of a slave girl, where Harriet Jacobs basically flees slavery in order to provide not only freedom for herself, but for her children. We see it also in a work by a playwright, Angela Grimke, who wrote a play called Rachel. So during this time, you had a lot of lynching after slavery. And so Black women were often standing in the front lines, fighting for their families and fighting for the people who they saw around them being killed with impunity. And so in slavery, Black motherhood was delegitimized and Black womanhood often defiled. And so the women of this era rose up and continued to play a role in gender and racial liberation. And we can add individuals like Ida B. Wells to that, as well as many of the others that Brenda Sanders Wise mentioned. Also, unfortunately, we have a legacy that carries on. And so we see this with individuals such as Mamie Till and Myrlie Evers Williams. Both of them harnessed their identities as mothers in the midst of incredible loss and used their voices to advocate for change. They drew upon their righteous rage as mothers whose families were torn apart by racial terror in order to shine a light on such injustices. And so Evers Williams sought justice for Megger through Byron De La Beckwith's 1994 murder conviction. This was following 2 trials with deadlocked all-white male juries 31 years earlier. And she says, all of us have a job to do, and mine has been to rear these 3 children, to be a strong, loving, but strict mother, to give to society and to give back to Meggers. And she identifies her role as a mother as key to preserving her husband's legacy. Also in her autobiography, Mamie Till pictured alongside her son, Emmett. She wrote an autobiography called Death of Innocence, and she thoughtfully explains that motherhood at that time during the Civil Rights Movement was a universal theme the media could present and the public could understand. So during the trial of her son's murders, they elevated her. And this is why when we think about Emmett Till's death as a catalyst for the Civil Rights Movement, Mamie Till played a key role in keeping her son's legacy visible and advocating for him publicly. Because if people could understand one thing, they could understand the pain of a mother. And so motherhood and children will come to symbolize so many aspects of the movement that was growing out of our suffering, Mamie Till says. She says a new generation of leaders would ultimately point our way, but it was their mothers who would nurture the movement. So when we think about that today, we're in another era where we have a movement happening. Many people call it Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black lives, but I think about the unfortunate legacy that gives us Mamie Till and Myrlie Evers Williams is also giving us these women, mothers of the movement, right? And so today, we still see the need for more work to be done. And guess who's doing that work? The mothers, right? And they sit at the forefront of these social issues that we face, and they give us strength, but they also give us hope, and they give us wisdom. And so this group comprises mothers who have lost children to violence, particularly gun violence, estate violence, police violence, and have gone on to advocate for issues of racial justice under the banner of Black Lives Matter. And they have also kept their deceased children, as well as the children of others, and the issues surrounding their deaths in public consciousness and memory by appearing in spaces such as the 2016 Democratic National Convention, as they're pictured there. They also have shown up in Beyonce's visual album, Lemonade. So they are not just stopping at one space. They're trying to talk to everybody wherever they can. Many of them tell their stories in work of autobiography, like Leslie McSpadden, who's pictured in blue there on the end. She's the mother of Michael Brown. She has a book that she just produced called Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil. And in that book, she does just that. She tells a narrative of Michael Brown that we don't get, right? In the media, we see Michael Brown stealing, or what it looks to be stealing, but that's the story they want to tell about him. Her book tells a different story. She also starts the group called Rainbow Mothers for other mothers who have lost their children to violence. So she's doing work beyond her son's death. Also, Lucia McBath, who's pictured alongside Sandra Bland's mother, who's in white. Lucy McBath is now a U.S. House of Representative member, right? And she is fighting for reform of U.S. gun laws, the same laws that her son's killer, he was walking around, he had a sense of madness, and he shot her son Jordan Davis simply because he thought the music in the car that he was sitting in was too loud. And that we live in a nation where that kind of person can own a gun, right? And so Lucy McBath is working to change that. Also, these women are making visible their loss in order to bring about change, and they draw upon their strength and wisdom and grace as mothers to speak back to those who devalue their children's lives as well as their own. They call attention to the ways Black women continue to bear many of society's burdens. They are positioned on the lower rungs of the economic wealth in the United States. Black women often make sacrifices that then put them in positions where they have to be assisted, or they're holding up our society. And so these women are not content to let that troubling status quo stand. And they are fighting for their children as well as all children. And so in just an illustration of what I'm saying and how this work by mothers continues to be ongoing, I wanted to end with a clip by State Senator Stephanie Flowers. Okay, I'm glad many of us have seen this, because I think it's phenomenal when we talk about the outraged mother and Black women's ability to deploy that. So I'm gonna try to play this. I think if I hit, oh, there we go. May I get some assistance? I might need to just try to see how I can hit play on this video. Because I think Stephanie Flowers says it much better than I can. Okay, it might be some volume.
It doesn't take much to look on the local news every night and see how many Black kids, Black boys, Black men are being killed with these stand-your-ground defenses that these people raise, then they get off. So I take issue with that. I'm the only person here of color, okay? I am a mother, too. And I have a son. And I care as much for my son as y'all care for yours. But my son doesn't walk the same path as yours does. So this debate deserves more time. I'm in Pine Bluff. We have killings regularly down there. Mr. Hunter knows, he's our prosecutor. Now I don't know where the heck, I know where you are from, Gary. And I don't know really where Mr. Ballinger is from. But I can tell you that for a long time since I've been back here in Arkansas, I have feared for my son's life. Now he's 27, he's out of Arkansas. And I thank God he is. When you're bringing up crap like this, it offends me. And then to limit the debate too. This is crazy. You don't have to worry about your children, real. I worry about my son. And I worry about other little black boys and girls. And people coming into my neighborhood, into my city, saying they got open carry rights, walking down in front of my doggone office in front of the courthouse. That's a bully. Do I have a right to stand my ground with some crazy ass person walking around with a doggone gun? I don't know what the hell he intends to do. But I know I am scared, I feel threatened. Just like some of y'all walking around here up in the legislature with these damn guns. What's his name? Garner came in here, walking around here with a damn gun in his under his coat. You can see the damn print. No, I don't. No, I don't. What the hell you gonna do? Shoot me? This deserves more attention. You want to come up here with all these little NRA bills that Alec had and all that stuff. I'm talking about my son's life. And I'm talking about the lives of other black kids. Do what the hell you want to do. Go ahead. Please. Silence me. Got your damn guidance going out. Damn team. And you can see the imprint. It's funny.
Well, you all can see why I wanted to play that clip. I feel like I've been watching it on repeat because I feel like Stephanie Flowers is expressing something so many of us feel about gun laws as well as the violence our children face, that we almost feel powerless because they go in a world where they are misperceived and stereotyped. And so, you know, the thing that's so beautiful about the video is how she draws upon that righteous anger, right?
Yeah.
In a goal for peace, right? She's saying she wants no more guns and people walking around in the open carry state where they are able to stand their ground and kill innocent black people on the basis of that law. And so she's advocating for peace, but she's using a very strong, eloquent rage to do so. And so, in many ways, black mothers understand the fight against oppression is not just about the present day, but also about the future. And by working in the legislative system, they're working to enact laws that will be consequential for generations to come. In their writing, as well as their activism, they're telling the story of black women that deserves greater life. And Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, a white mother is no different from a black mother. The only thing is they haven't had as many problems, but they cried the same tears. Black mothers have been fighting for legitimacy since slavery on behalf of their children and families and continue to do so today. And it is their forceful expression, their grief, their love, that truly and compellingly proclaims that Black Lives Matter. Thank you.